welcome to the SquaMates podcast. This is a very serious podcast about reptiles and amphibians, and I am one of your hosts. My name is Dr. Mark D. Schertz. I'm the curator of herpetology at the Natural History Museum of Denmark, and I'm joined today by my three lovely co-hosts, Ethan Kosak.
Hi, I'm Ethan. I am an artist, an illustrator, and I keep lots of reptiles in my home.
And Hiral Naik.
Hi, I'm Hiral, snake ecologist and conservationist from South Africa.
And Gabriel Ugetto.
And I'm Gabriel Ugetto, and I'm a concept artist, paleo artist, and scientific illustrator, and I used to work in herpetology, but not anymore.
I have some great news for you guys. I have managed to, because I got a new phone, I got a free subscription to Apple TV Plus, which means I have now watched the first 10 minutes of the first episode of Prehistoric Planet. And the only time I do it is when I'm trying to get my son to brush his teeth. But we have decided that it's maybe not the optimal thing for a 2-year-old to be seeing as a documentary, because then the 2-year-old thinks that they can just go and see dinosaurs, which...
I mean, they are pretty convincing.
And they are very convincing, especially to a 2-year-old who's like constantly asking if there are monsters in places because he has like a shirt that has a monster on it. And then, so maybe not the best way to do things. But what I've seen so far, those first 10 minutes, brilliant. I don't know why people don't watch this show. Really great. Anyway, so that's one thing from my side. Today, we are going to be talking about rain frogs, everyone's favorite little blobs. We have some interesting things to be saying about them. There's some really interesting new research.
TikTok darlings.
They are TikTok darlings. Everybody loves a rain frog. We're going to get into a little bit about the taxonomy, a little bit of some things about the pet trade, and then a little bit also of a really fun recent paper about adhesion, which I think people will be interested in. Before we dive into that, I want to give a small update from my side, which is that I have a major update that I'm not allowed to tell you about. So,
what are you, Gabriel now?
That's so true. It's all under embargo. Literally, they're press embargoes. So,
well, Gabriel and I have a project we can't talk about. That's true.
From the 5th of September, I'll be at liberty to disclose it. Until then, I am mum's the word, bound by secrecy. We actually have several really, really exciting projects, one of which I think is going to grip the community take the online media by storm. I'm very excited about it. We've just had the that one is a paper, and I'm allowed to at least mention that it's a paper, and we've just had it properly accepted. So that will be quite fun. That will be also associated with a press release and stuff. Man. Yeah. So that's fun. Any other exciting updates from you guys?
I have. Oh, go ahead, Hiral. Go ahead.
Okay, I can go. Well, I think I mentioned the last time. I mean, I'm in my final stages of the PhD, so that's always quite exciting to be in. But the paper that I had worked on, which is the first paper from my PhD, has gone through its first round of revisions. So hopefully. It headed in the right direction.
Was it nice. So did you? What was the decision on the paper?
I had to do some major revisions, but it is for a snakebite special issue, so hopefully it will be accepted.
Yeah, and you managed it. Like, if the major revisions they're behind you now, I presume.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
awesome.
That's great.
That's the best.
That's
yeah.
Exactly. There's also, like, I always find it interesting as a reviewer where you're giving this feedback to someone. You're like, major revisions for you, but I'm only telling you that it's major revisions because I think it's going to take a little bit of time to integrate all these things versus major revisions for you. You need to completely redo all of your analyses because it's like, that's the same decision, but on the other hand, that's a very different thing, right?
Like objecting to the core of it versus...
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, that's a reject decision, right? There's also that option where I can be like, you can't accept this. And it wasn't that, which is good. No, that's cool.
Congratulations, that's great.
I've also been awarded my second Rufford Foundation grant to carry on our snake conservation work, which is really exciting.
Bravo, that's fantastic.
Congratulations again.
So what's the goal with that grant?
We're training up some local members to actually start doing some herb work, a lot of snake conservation work, and basically what we call para-ecologists. Training them up to really understand why we do snake conservation and why snakes and the rest of the other wildlife are really cool. So, yeah, quite exciting.
That basic capacity building is so important. And I imagine that's really valuable to get it also spread out. And then those educators create educators, etc. I mean, that's really the seed of so much of this stuff. So congratulations and also awesome that you guys are doing that work. I think that's so good.
Yeah.
And Ethan, you also have some big stuff going on, hey?
Well, I'll keep it brief, but basically I'm maybe by the time you see this, the crowdfund will probably be over, but we've already hit the goal. We hit the goal, the base goal to fund my new book, my new graphic novel, which is called The Unfamiliars. It was under 8 hours. It was closer to 7 hours on the first day. So it was like a really, really strong launch for the book. And I think we're going to hit some really good stretch goals. And it's going
last time
really
I checked, you were like back 12,000, right?
Yeah, we are not. I think the next stretch goal is 12,500, and we're like less than $150 away from that. So
congratulations, man.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of work ahead of me because when you put these things out there, you're basically just pitching an idea to everybody to pre-order it, and so it's like you do like 5 pages of this thing and hope that that's enough to convince everyone they want it, and it's going well. So,
yeah, that's so good. What's the overall length that you're imagining for the total graphic novel?
We are saying 150 pages. It's going to be black and white. But because it's black and white, we can do a little bit more. For this one, it's like the line art is kind of speaking for itself. So, I'm going really, really detailed with these, and we'll see how long I last.
Yeah, I've seen some of the early art, and it's like, oh my god, the amount of work that you're putting into each scene is incredible.
It's a totally different type of project from what Moistly Harmless is. That's the other thing is we're trying to we stuck because we're basically completely sold out of Moistly Harmless. So Moistly Harmless, if we basically do double. If we fund it 200%, it'll fund a reprint of Moistly Harmless. So we'll see if we get there.
Yeah, super great.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's so cool, and I'm sure elating to feel so much support for your project.
It's really nice, and it's good, and I'm excited to make it. It's also terrifying when when people put that much faith in what you're doing, and you're like, okay, well now I actually have to make the thing. So.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
super great. Gabriel, how about on your side?
Well, I think last time I told you about that. I just I think it's out now that I did a bunch of illustrations for the upcoming book on dinosaur behavior by Dr. David Home, and that will be out on November 5th. You can pre-order the book now. I did a ton of illustrations and line drawings and grayscale drawings for the book, so it's fully illustrated by me. It's an awesome book about dinosaur behavior. Apart from that, I just did a huge mural illustration for the Fukui Dinosaur Museum in Japan.
Awesome.
That is for a new exhibit that just came out. That just started in July 12th, I think. So if you're in Japan, you can go see it now. Also, I've been doing a lot of package art for the new figures from Beast of the Mesozoic line.
I'm super excited about that, by the way.
Those are awesome. And there are a bunch of them that are coming, and I'm doing some illustrations for those. I'm doing a lot of illustrations for things that are still under embargo, so I cannot talk. But I'm going to say that one of the ones that I'm doing is for a new species of something that is unbelievable. And it's by far the most interesting and bizarre and amazing animal I've ever reconstructed.
Wow.
And I think everybody's going to be, wow. It's one of those things that you see and you're like, whoa, it's kind of a game changer thing. So
I think there was an early
excited.
hint at this in the last episode as well. You mentioned something about like working on a very, very exciting thing. So I guess this is probably the same thing that you're still...
I just finished the illustration, so I don't know. I know that the paper hasn't been sent or anything yet.
Okay.
So it's gonna probably take a few months, but it's such a cool thing that I cannot wait so I can talk about it.
This is going to be cover Nature or Science, I'm guessing. So
it's the fossilized angel from The Simpsons.
Kind of
all manner of things that we could I could speculate on. Is it a transitional bat?
No, it's no mammal. It's no mammal. No mammal.
Oh, 20 questions. Here we go. Right. Is it mineral?
I cannot say. No, it's an animal. It's an animal, but it's not a mammal.
But it's also a mineral.
But it's also technically yes.
Oh,
I mean, you could say that. You could literally say that about all animals, really.
Exactly.
True. I've ruined the game now. All right. Well, the next thing I just wanted to briefly mention is that I guess none of you guys are going to be at the World Congress, unfortunately. Oh, Hiral, are you coming?
I will be. Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do a special episode of the show that's just Hiral and me.
Yeah, you should actually, because you should record something for the show.
That's wonderful. Yes, we'll definitely do that. We'll find some randomers to just replace Ethan and Gabriel here, and we could do a live show. That's wonderful. I'll have all my recording equipment with me.
Just get like a sock puppet that says, "I don't know what that means."
That'll work really nicely. So that's very awesome. We'll talk off air about your travel plans. I want to know. But yeah, so I'll be flying. We're recording today. I'd like to mention the date of the things that we're doing because it actually helps when. So I'm recording today, 24th of July. I fly 2024. I fly on Saturday, and then I'm going with a team from Berlin to Mulu, which is so Mulu National Park is famous for its limestone karsts and all kinds of other things. It's a fairly remote and inaccessible area of Borneo where you can only get by airplane. And I'm very excited because I looked on iNaturalist at all of the herps that have been observed there and then basically set my priorities based on how cool they are. And yeah, there's some very, very, very cool stuff there that I'm excited to try and find. And hopefully we'll be in good company. Hiral, are you going to do any travel while you're there?
Yeah, the week after. So I fly out in a week, and then I have not had any time to plan my travels. But I figured I'm going to meet some herpy people, and then we're just going to go find some
There's
stuff.
a lot of stuff that, so the conference is being held in Kuching, for those of you who don't know. The delegate list is 1,500 herpetologists, which is bonkers. So there are going to be a lot of herpers there, which is going to be really exciting. And then, yeah, I mean, there's really some great herping opportunities within driving distance of Kuching. I had friends who arrived in Kuching about half a week ago, and they were already on the first evening of having arrived, like fishing frogs out of dikes in the city and stuff. So it's like there's plenty of herping to do. And they've just been posting pictures of elephants and stuff on
nice.
That's awesome.
On Instagram. So yeah, there's what a place. I'm very excited. Very, very excited. So good. Right. Well, okay. Then I think after a brief interlude, we're going to get into our main topic of discussion, which is rain frogs. So join us again after this musical number. so we're back. Let's talk about rain frogs. First of all, one important thing out of the way. There are rain frogs, which is the family Brevicipitidae. And then there are rain frogs, which is the things that are round that people refer to as rain frogs. So notably, there's a genus of frogs in Australia called Notoden, which are also sometimes referred to as rain frogs. We have a genus in Madagascar called Scaphiophryne or Scaphiophryne, also sometimes called rain frogs. Some people apparently call tomato frogs also rain frogs sometimes. That's obviously weird.
That's obviously wrong.
Yeah.
When are we going to do an episode about how bad common names are in herpetology?
That was actually the other option for today's discussion, but we've
decided it's on the agenda. Yeah,
it's on the agenda. That will definitely happen. I think it's a good idea, an interesting source of debate. Although I imagine
that entire episode is going to be old man yells at cloud.
Yes,
yeah, that's going to be me the whole time.
I look forward to it, Gabriel. Yes. I'll give you the reins. Yeah. So no, but I think the important thing
you could make the case that spadefoot toads here in the U.S. occupy a similar niche.
Right. So then there's the
almost
ecomorphological.
All frogs are rain frogs because whenever it rains, you can see a bunch of frogs.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Let's take it back from there.
This is similar to my rant about the pink-tongued skinks. Just normal tongue skinks because
they're just not blue tongue skinks. It's true.
That's the dumbest name I've ever. Okay, sorry.
It's pretty dumb. All right, but rain frogs, right? Brevicipitidae. Now, important to note that Microhylidae and Brevicipitidae used to be the same thing, right? Okay. So this divide also only happened fairly late. Which is why, in the early literature, all of the microhylids are in Brevicipitidae, which causes some confusion. Early literature is in the end of the 1800s. So, and in fact, that division really kind of took place in the early 1910s and 1920s, specifically. So the 1934 monograph by Hampton Wildman Parker was a big thing that kind of established microhylids as their own thing, separating them from the Brevicipitids, but that had already kind of been started by Noble and Parker in 26.
Are microhylids still the closest relative to Brevicipitids?
I was going to ask, are they the sister group? No? Okay.
No, they're not. So the Brevicipitids are a very early branch within, let me bring up the relevant phylogeny so that I can describe it recently. Specifically, for those at home, I'm bringing up the Feng et al. Phylogeny from 2017. And so the Brevicipitids are sister to the Hemisotids. And the Hemisotids plus the Brevicipitids are sister themselves to the Arthroleptids and the Hyperolids. So they form this thing that we call the Afrobatrachia. And the Afrobatrachia is one of the deep lineages within Rhinoidea, of which another deep lineage is the Microhylidae, which should probably be elevated to Microhyloidea. That's a conversation for another time. But so basically there are three big lineages within the Rhinoidea. There is the Microhylidae, the Afrobatrachia, and the Natatanura, which is a horrible name. And Natatanurans include rhinids, but also mantellids, dicoglossids, pyxiocephalids, etc. So that you can imagine, like this is one of the counterpart groups to the Hyloidea, which of course contains the hylids, the bufonids, the eleutherodactylids, all of those things.
The better frogs.
Can I ask because I'm a little lost. You mentioned Rhinidae, right?
Rhinidae is in there, yeah.
Rhinidae is Rhinidae still including our what used to be North American rana?
Of course.
Yeah. So the things that were split off, which became various different other genera, including what's now become
Lithobates.
Lithobates, but Lithobates itself has now also been split. So Catasbiana is no longer in Lithobates; it is now in Aquarana. All of those splits, you can go and look on the amphibian species.
Which, by the way,
database.
If I open my window here, even now at this time of the day, you can still hear big frogs. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
That's where I was going. So Afrobatrachia is still including
No, Afrobatrachia is another one. They're not in Afrobatrachia. They're in Natatanura, but they're still in Rhinoidea.
Okay.
Right? And then the very deepest lineage, the one sister to Rhinoidea, seems to be Zooglossidae, which are from the Seychelles. So there's this is a lineage, like a very ancient lineage that's in between these different things. Okay, so that gives you an idea, right, where the Brevicipitids are. The Brevicipitids are closely related to the Hemisotids. Hemisotidae includes Hemisus, which is this very pointy-snouted, forward-burrowing frog, also a very round boy, and arguably also could be, rain frog-esque, right?
Okay.
So we have
this kind of like most of the microhylids in the New World.
A lot of the microhylids in the New World are also like this. But I think the thing that kind of characterizes what we call a rain frog is that they are, closer to a golf ball than a potato, right? so like we're talking about frogs that have like an extremely round aspect to them. I mean, this is why Notre Dame falls into this, and the Malagasy, the Scaphiophrynidae would fall into that, and then the Brevicipitids are all, of course, the archetypal. So what we're talking about today is only the Brevicipitids. But you just have to understand that, like, when you're talking about rain frogs, so often you'll see people online who are like, where can I buy a rain frog? And then someone will send a link to Josh's Frogs, which is one of the biggest distributors of frogs in the US, to a link to a Scaphiophryne, or Scaphiophryne from Madagascar. And they're like, oh, you can get them here. Now, there's a big difference here. We'll get back to this in a little bit, but there's a big difference because Scaphiophrynidae have been bred in captivity. Brevicipitidae have never been bred in captivity. We'll come back to that. Let's put a pin in it.
Someone got close in Japan, I believe.
Allegedly. Yeah.
Allegedly.
We'll put a pin in it. We'll come back to that. So let me just talk about Brevicipitids, because I think the diversity of the clade warrants just a brief mention here. So Brevicipitids consist today of 37 species, and those 37 species are divided across just 5 genera. And the ones that you think of when you hear about rain frogs, what people are talking about almost always is Breviceps, because Breviceps are the really, really round ones. What I didn't know just 3 or 4 years ago was that there are some Brevicipitids that look like golf ball shaped, but they're arboreal, which is crazy. Yes. So in Tanzania, you have Probreviceps and Calulina, and these things are arboreal or semi-arboreal rain frogs, which is fascinating. They have expanded digits, but they still have the very grumpy, very short face, right? So one of the things that characterizes Brevicipitidae in particular is this skull shape, this incredibly shortened snout. And Gabriel is here pulling up a picture of Probreviceps rungwensis. So that one is actually terrestrial. But if you go look at Calulina,
how do you'll
see Callulina.
So my next question is, are they secondarily arboreal?
Yes.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so arboreal, like the arboreal terrestrial switch in frogs is a remarkably simple switch. Right, so it's crazy with which the frequency this happens within a single group. So you can have it going up and down. You can get them totally fossorial up to arboreal.
We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
I think within Microhylidae, I think we talked about it.
Yes, we've certainly talked about it in Microhylids.
Yeah.
Another really remarkable case of this in Africa is Leptopelis, where Leptopelis, here's Calulina that Gabriel is showing on the screen now for those of you who are on YouTube.
Frog shaped.
It's more froggy. It's kind of more potato-y.
Yeah.
So they remind me a little bit of Oreophrynella from
very much. Yes, very much like Oreophrynella, and also like Oreophryne from Southeast Asia. So it's amazing how these things they basically recapitulate again and again and again.
The level of convergence is crazy.
Insane. Yeah. So I wanted to point this out because I think, what we're talking about for the most part is still going to be Breviceps, because that's what people think about. But I think that it's fascinating and exciting to listeners who've never, really dived into this to know that Gabriel is now showing. Which one is it? Gibbosus, I think.
I don't know. They don't
I
say
think
here.
It's
a Brevicips, but I don't know
Breviceps
which
gibbosus,
one.
which is a particularly grumpy frog. So these frogs are often characterized by they have very forward-facing eyes. They have a very downward. Sorry, hit the microphone. Downturned mouth, and that makes for this memeable appearance. That is obviously the thing that makes them so incredibly popular. Very brief overview of the ecology of these frogs. So these are, for the most part, Breviceps especially, are truly fossorial. They come up to breed, but they call. So they come up to call and to breed and stuff. But they are mostly underground. They will also emerge for predation and things. But yeah, you can go for a very long time without seeing them. And I'm sure, Ethan, you also can document that.
They come out, I would say, once every week to 2 weeks for food.
Yeah.
I will sometimes worry about them and dig them out and go, "Are you okay?" And they're always fine.
Right.
And then I'll feed them. But usually it takes them about once a week. I'll see them out looking for food. And they're
Hiral, I
interesting.
guess you can also attest to the rarity with which you ever see a rain frog around.
Oh yeah, it's just like when I had the Sicilians. It's a box of dirt. Most of the time. You don't even see a hole. They just completely bury themselves.
They're very good. So Breviceps are also backwards burrowers. So they burrow with their hind limbs. They do a scooping motion.
I have them right next to me, but again, they're buried. So I could try to put my gloves on and take one out, but we'll see if they're.
Yeah. Gabriel, you have to make sure that images you show on the screen are CC BY.
What do you mean?
Copyright, because it's video.
Oh. It's true. Well, I'm pulling these. Okay, so I'm going to show these out of iNaturalist. I'm showing iNaturalist photos.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
Usually,
I think those are all.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the food, so you can see what the food of some Breviceps look like.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say the food looks like this.
Just fruit flies, right?
Yeah.
So burrowed for most of the year. They live largely terrestrial, so we are fossorial. So we don't know very much about the ecology of these frogs, and that is both challenging, but also an interesting opportunity. In many cases, we do know a little about the breeding habits, and there are some very interesting things about the breeding habits of these frogs. So they use what's called glued amplexus. So the sex ratio between males and females is enormous. The females are much, much, much larger than males. And because of that, the typical way that a male would grasp onto a female in other groups of frogs, which is, inguinal or axillary or cephalic amplexus, where they would grasp around, they're physically incapable of doing. So what they do instead is that they adhere themselves to the female. Oh, Ethan has managed to get one out. What a sweetheart. Difficult to get it to focus.
Yeah, sorry,
it's not
I can't get it focusing, but this is what we're talking about. This is a younger animal, but...
So how big do they get normally? What's the largest Brevicipitidae?
That might be more of a question for Hiral, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some about half the size of maybe my palm, I reckon.
Okay, so decent size.
Yeah, probably. But they're always covered in dirt, so you can never get a good photograph of them.
No, they always look terrible. They always, absolutely.
I wonder if you can employ the same kind of technique that you do to find Sicilians to find Breviceps, just dig and see what comes out. I guess do you usually find them in kind of looser soils?
So on a good night, they're just on above ground hunting, so we don't really have to dig them up to find them. But it's entirely dependent on the rain. I know there's a lot of South African herpers that have some really good photographs out there. And And again, it's really opportunistic. On a really good night, you might be able to see like 6 or 7 in like a little area.
Yeah.
So what's fascinating to me, and I actually have asked you about this. I don't know if I asked you about this on the stream or not, but there's a debate among hobbyists going on about what kind of substrate should they be kept in, and I think I had asked you, what was the substrate like, and you were like, they're all over the place. They're
Yeah.
So some people are like, there's a paper I think that mentions having collected them all in sand, like just completely dry sand.
So this is also going to depend on the species.
I was about to say, I'm sure that there is some variation.
And this is sorry, we're talking about Brevicipitidae aspersus.
Yeah, right.
So how many species of Brevicipitidae are there?
There are 20 species of Brevicipitidae. And of those, I mean, the vast majority of people will probably only have heard of a handful of these. So Aspersus is the one that's in the pet trade quite commonly. Mozambicus is also in the pet trade. And then Macrops is probably targeted for the pet trade, but very, very hard to get. Macrops is definitely a sand-dwelling frog.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones I wouldn't know as much. So I think Macrops is from Namibia. And it looks also quite different. It's from Namaqualand and Luderitz in Namibia. So
I was about to ask you, so I really know nothing about this frog. So how I would imagine, like with other species of frogs, there are some species that are rather similar between them, and so they might be difficult to differentiate. So I'm sure that there's a lot of mistake in the pet trade about what species they have.
So this actually brings us on to the next thing, which is about the pet trade. So right now there just aren't a lot of species in the pet trade. And maybe Ethan, you can speak.
Yeah, can I speak to that? So what I can tell you is that they have been commonly imported into Asia for for a while now. And that is where all the TikTok videos came from, was Japanese keepers. And I think they're Korean too.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a couple of accounts where they were keeping them, and they are definitely regularly imported there. The case in the US is way different, right? We have not had them, but the demand is super high. The one that I have 2 females. I bought 3 off of the very first shipment to come into the US, and the male died in transit, basically. So I can tell you they don't ship particularly well. They are extremely expensive in the US, and anybody who claims to have captive bred animals is lying.
Right. I think this is the important point. That's one of the things that I want to emphasize here.
Yeah.
Is that people are asking. So there's this whole thing about pet trade and captive breeding and like where the animal's coming from and things. And we've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but I think it always bears re-mentioning and rediscussing because also opinions change. But it's a nuanced and complicated thing because. At least, so I know the case in Madagascar. It's very different than in many other places, but I do know the case in Madagascar fairly well, where there is livelihood being generated for people who are able to sustainably collect animals when there is a sustainable possibility for that collection, and often those are then, governed by quotas in the countries of origin, etc., which are then, fairly strictly enforced.
And I think aspersus, at least like in South Africa where you are, Hiral, I think are least concern. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're not going through any population declines or anything.
No.
But that we again, it may be a case of no one's really looked
how
into
would
it.
You know?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's also where I would like raise some flags is if these things start to be imported or exported in larger numbers. And as Hiral, you mentioned, like it's not hard to find them necessarily if you go to the right place on the right type of time. So, getting a certain number of them is probably possible. But in the vast majority of cases for the pet trade, that no assessment has ever been done as to whether or not it's actually threatening the species, especially for least concerned species.
And I gotta say too, like, as somebody who is involved with this stuff, like, I absolutely understand the ethical objections here, right? Especially buying a species that's first off the boat. And I guess the way I was looking at that at the time was like, well, if they're gonna get bought, I prefer they go to someone who knows what they're doing rather than someone who's just saw them on TikTok.
Yes.
I
would be interested in hearing your opinions about this, but my view is basically the same, Ethan. I think that there should be. I'm going to go out on a limb and actually tell my opinion, which is that I think there should be limits to who can take animals that are not yet established in the pet trade. And that those should then go to responsible breeders, private institutions, public institutions, who can then try to establish
with a track record, right?
Someone with a track record. It should not be possible for someone who has never kept an animal before, let alone a super rare species, just because they have enough money to buy it, to acquire a specimen that they have no chance because it's just going to die in their care.
I agree. I absolutely 100% agree with you that it shouldn't just be left up to capitalism, right? But that's the way it is right now.
At the moment.
I actually got, and I should say, shout out to Sean. One of my, like, I guess you would say, fans paid for the frogs.
You mentioned this,
and I'm very thankful for that, and it was very nice of them. And and I bought a trio with the intent to, hey, let's see what we can do.
Right.
Unfortunately, the male didn't make it, so I've been on the lookout since then. It's been like not quite a year, probably. There haven't been any other shipments since that, like the two that they came in on.
Do you know, Hiral, like what is the feeling toward this kind of behavior in South Africa, where some of these animals are coming from?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I think South Africa is notorious for being on the list where everything people can get whatever they want here. I mean, and on top of that list is one of the most endangered lizards that we have, which is the sun gazer Smaug giganteus.
Oh yeah. It was like barely named, right? And then people were collecting it.
Well, giganteus is a very old name, but the genus name had only recently changed. Yeah.
So it's problematic. I mean, I think a lot of people living around these species kind of take them because they don't really know much about them. They find them very cute. We find that with chameleons quite a lot.
So that's like captive care within South Africa. People are taking them and keeping them in captivity.
That's not unheard of.
And that's not actually easy to regulate either. I mean, we have this problem. It's illegal in many places, but people still do it. Like, people will actually, I think in Denmark, for private stuff, you're allowed to keep, for instance, tadpoles. I believe you're allowed to raise them in captivity so that you can interact with your children, because there's very pro-nature kind of style here. But I know that, for instance, in the US, in various places, that is totally illegal. You're not allowed to remove animals from the wild. So
this is another thing where I have
probably
mixed...
not here in Florida.
I have very mixed feelings about this stuff. There's a lot of complex feelings here because, right, in New York where I am, and I've said this before, you're not allowed to keep any native species.
Really?
There's some definite pros to that, right? But at the same time, there's some major drawbacks because that basically incentivizes people to keep exotics.
And also you need and what Mark said about the contact that children need with nature. I mean, I wouldn't be who I was if I wasn't catching lizards and stuff when I was a kid and keeping them.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't have had developed the same love for animals. So I think there is an importance to that.
I think we need to. This is another one of those things where the law doesn't distinguish between a kid who wants to keep tadpoles over the spring and release them or something versus poachers going out and collecting frogs en masse.
Yeah.
And I think
whatever,
this is also because it's the same law for birds and for mammals as it is for the herbs, right? And that is the nuance is needed in this kind of regulation,
It's
especially
getting
in
better.
the US.
In the US at least, it's getting better. We're starting to see some, like we've been going to Utah in the summers to visit some of my wife's family, and I have been getting the state herb collecting permit when I'm there, just in case. And and they have legal bag limits for stuff, and
Crazy.
it's self-reported, but that law is basically there because in the last decade or so, it used to be that people would just go and bag hundreds of chuckwallas,
Right.
and then sell them, and often they sold them overseas to,
Sure.
to Asia and stuff. So it's not strictly a over there problem. It's also happening here. It's happening with turtles here a lot. People collect North American turtles and sell them overseas.
Well, there's
and
stuff
get busted for it,
like
all the time.
Phrynosoma, which is like the horned lizards. Phrynosoma, they're very much, and they are in danger. A lot of species are in danger. So
yeah.
And there's high demand for them because they are very, very cool lizards.
Talk about a species that the average schmo is not going to be able to keep.
Exactly.
Anteater. Jesus.
Exactly.
That is not an easy sell. Definitely.
So, going back to Brevicipitidae and coming from a person that doesn't know anything about them, can we backtrack a little bit? So I want to know what's their geographic range, like the basics about Brevicipitidae.
Yeah. So the family Brevicipitidae is limited to Africa. They do not occur outside of Africa, and in fact, they are exclusively in sub-Saharan Africa. As I said, there are several species that are arboreal, and there are rainforest endemic, so several species are only found in rainforests, but then there are others that are found in deserts and in woodlands and all kinds of different habitats. So in terms of the overall general ecology of these things, they're wide, it's quite broad. In general, these are what we might call myrmecophagous, or maybe better to say eusociophagous. I really like that term, where they eat eusocial insects. That's basically the main part of their diet is any eusocial
termites
insect.
And
very similar to horned
like
lizards, actually. Yes, this is true. But the advantage over a horned lizard is that frogs are not very discriminatory when it comes down to this. So Ethan is able to feed them fruit flies.
They love baby pinhead crickets.
Crickets, the same, because it's the prey profile that really matters. They don't give a damn. Probably it doesn't even matter at a it might matter at a mineral level, but on the whole,
I dust mine with stuff.
Yeah, right. So you can supplement the diet appropriately in captivity, which you might not be able to do with a Phrynosoma, because these
interestingly enough, there is now a company selling formic acid powder that you're supposed to be able to shake and bake your crickets with.
Smart.
To keep
to
them.
Get them.
I don't know. I haven't tried it.
To give them that taste.
To get them the well, it could work. It really could, because smell matters a lot, and these things are, they're choosing their prey according to the
it sure
to
as
the
hell
pheromone
beats trying to
profile
raise like harvester ants in your house,
right,
for sure.
Exactly. You do not want to have a situation where you have to. But anyway, so they will eat termites, they will eat ants, but they are like other frogs. They are still generalists, so they will also eat anything that fits into the prey profile that crosses their path. And so
I found they don't like isopods though. I tried the dwarf white.
That doesn't surprise me very much. Isopods are particularly difficult to digest.
Yeah.
What is their the reproductive behavior? Like, do they lay their eggs on water?
They are, I believe, direct developers.
Oh.
I can't help you there because nobody's really accomplished it.
Yeah. I have to look that up.
So the ones who got close, from what I remember,
I think because I know nothing about these frogs, like literally,
was that they build a tunnel chamber, sort of the way some Sicilians do, and part of the chamber needs to be submerged.
I am fairly certain that they are direct developers.
Okay.
So all species are direct developers that we know.
I am apparently wrong. There
Oh.
are apparently they have nidicolous endotrophic tadpoles, which is at least some of them have nidicolous endotrophic tadpoles. That is a fancy way of saying they have tadpoles that live in a jelly nest away from the water and that are never going into the water.
Sort of midwife toad.
No, midwife toads will eventually put their eggs into the water. More like most of the microhyla, or many of the microhylas, so they'll have them in a nest somewhere. They will develop into tadpoles, hatch out of the eggs, and the tadpoles will stay in the egg, will feed on the yolk only, and then eventually metamorphose. So it's kind of on the way toward direct development.
Yeah, that's going to be a pain in the ass to figure out.
Yeah, I am as surprised at myself that I don't know the answer to this question. So they do not have a free tadpole stage. And some of them have direct development, but I just found a picture of one that allegedly had tadpoles in a nest. And so there must be some that also have an endotrophic nidicolous tadpole, which is, as I say, somewhere in between.
So there's a variety of strategies.
Yes, but Adspersus is direct developing.
The alleged captive breeding event that I read about, Mark, was that the people involved got as far as they made the chamber for the eggs, but no eggs.
Right, which is not really the full.
That's nothing. They might dig holes all the time.
Congratulations, well done.
So then the male has vocal sacs. And the vocal sacs are split or one or...
Sorry, say that again. What was your question?
The vocal sacs are split or one?
I think it's a single vocal chamber, although I'm not actually sure of the detailed anatomy of the...
So again, I don't have a male, but I believe from what I've seen is one.
Yeah, I think it's one very large vocal sac.
It's a light...
Yeah, it's one very large vocal sac. Yes.
Yeah, and it's a very... It's not a super loud call. It's kind of a tinkling. Well, maybe they're loud where you are in the wild, but from what I've seen online and stuff, it's not a super loud call.
Well, I'm sure that there are different kinds of calls depending on the species and the genus and all that.
Right. No, I was talking about Adspersus.
Here's the deal. If I can find an audio clip of the call of a Breviceps that I'm allowed to use, we'll put it in here. Yeah, so that's what they sound like. Ta-da! Fascinating. Yeah, so that's what they sound like. I mentioned that they have this glued amplexus, and that gluing is a really interesting thing, and that actually brings me on to this paper that I really want to talk about, just briefly. We don't have to go into the super details. It's a very complex paper. This paper is by Shabnam Zaman et al., published in Nature Communications, and is entitled Recurrent Evolution of Adhesive Defense Systems in Amphibians by Parallel Shifts in Gene Expression, which is a fun way of saying that they looked at the glue produced by two different groups of frogs, and they compared the mechanism and also the actual proteins that are involved in making this glue. And the two that they compared are tomato frogs, Discophus, specifically Discophus guineti, and Breviceps. I can't remember which Breviceps they looked at. So the paper is mostly focused on the tomato frog, Discophus guineti, which is from Madagascar, but it also compares at the gene level and gene expression level with Breviceps mozambicus. And this is crazy. So the first thing that they do in this paper, which you'll find links to in the show notes, is that they prove, first of all, that the white secretion, so when you handle a tomato frog, the first thing that it does is get slippery. Good technique, right? The next thing that it does is get sticky. So initially it produces this transparent fluid that's slippery, and then it starts to produce this white fluid. It also inflates itself. That white fluid is sticky. And the way that that the authors proved that this is a protein thing and also tested its adhesive capabilities is they, first of all, they took it and they did protein analysis and confirmed there are proteins in there. And secondly, they took 2 Lego bricks and they took the stuff and they glued them together, and then they measured the force required to separate them again, which is just beautiful, especially as someone who currently lives in Denmark and Lego is like the national thing.
I thought you were going to say they took them and they
stick them to the ceiling.
Yeah.
But this is a brilliant technique. So they even say in the thing, mechanical pull tests were carried out using smooth-surfaced hard plastic blocks, and then in brackets, Lego registered trademark. And then they connected them with glue. And then they bound them together, and then they tested the strength to pull them apart. So brilliant. Okay, this proves that it's a glue, that it has strong adhesive properties. And then they characterize this, and they show, okay, well, this is a certain kind of protein. And then they look at the domains of the protein that are at the genetic and genomic level, and they compare those between the tomato frog and Brevicipitidae mosambicus. And what they find is a similar level of expression and a similar level of selection on 2 groups or 2 genes, which are specifically called PRIT and galectin. And galectin you might have heard of because it's a common substance. And so what this indicates is that the gluing mechanism that has been developed by these 2 different groups of frogs separately has a kind of convergent element to it. They're using a similar mechanism, and it's specifically a protein-based glue, which is really, really cool. Discophus, male and females are almost the same size. In Brevicipitidae, they use that glue to, as I mentioned before, physically glue the male to the back of the female. I was going to say,
one's a defense glue, the other's a sex glue.
Yeah, but I think that Brevicipitidae use it in defense as well. I don't know, Hiral, have you handled them to get, have you gotten glued upon?
No, not really, but now I'm curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen mine
Not that I'm encouraging prodding it with a stick, but you might want to prod it with a stick.
I don't make a habit of handling any of my animals or harassing them to the point that they would do that. But
I'm excited because, of course, in Borneo, there's califrinus, which are the sticky frogs. And sticky frogs are famously sticky. And they are, they also produce a kind of glue. So
I wonder if it's the same as the Trachycephalus, which are called milk frogs, which they have kind of the same.
So they do compare this not with Trachycephalus, but with Bombina. And in Bombina, there's a white secretion that is poison, but not adhesive. And they compare the profiles, and they find that they have different components to them. So this is indeed a separate thing than the poison production, right? So in Trachycephalus, I guess it's probably also an adhesive that's being produced. So it's interesting that so many things are these
I've heard that it has poisonous
secretions,
but when you handle Trachycephalus, it definitely gets sticky and you get
So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. I just wanted to point out this paper because I thought it was super cool to characterize, first of all, that the glue.
So in Brevicipitidae, the male is much smaller, and it glues to the back of the female.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then basically just waits it out until she's ready to lay. So probably there's an initial, courtship or something going on. I don't know if there's anything.
And that's because the inability to grasp her and have any kind of plexus because they're so rotund. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's interesting.
So this is really interesting. So one of my earliest very successful posts on Tumblr was a picture of an X-ray of Brevicipitidae, and then I dove into a lot of the anatomical literature on Brevicipitidae because, fascinatingly, by mass, Brevicipitidae are possibly the most muscular vertebrates out there. They are pure muscle. Like the whole body is crazy muscular. There's a fascinating feature, which I'd love to be able to demonstrate on myself, but the limitations of the video make that difficult. But almost the entire thigh is included in the body cavity. That's why Breviceps also look very weird compared to many of the other
They
frogs.
don't hop.
They
Yeah,
don't
there you
hop.
go.
And that's
Yeah.
partly the
Yeah.
reason they don't hop is that they physically don't have the freedom of the thigh. The thigh is within the body cavity. And the way that that is achieved is through like massive muscular advancements of the various different attachments to the thigh.
Yeah.
You can imagine when you strongly enhance your connections between thigh and your iliac crests of the hip, what you get is a very powerful digging leg, right?
That's why.
And so what you've done is you've made this little ball of muscle, literally little ball of muscle, that is able to dig very, very effectively.
They are. They can
most
just
of the time,
completely.
when they're super inflated, that's a defense thing, right? When people show them these pictures, they're super inflated. That's mostly defense. I think one thing to mention is people will have seen Breviceps macrops squeaking. Sounds like a little dog toy. It's like, mee!
Yeah.
And what's happening in that video is a defense call, like a defense. It's actually a release call, an alarm call.
Yeah.
And that is not the normal vocalization of the frog.
It's not how they normally look, right?
Right. People don't know, but most, I would say, a lot of frogs have alarm calls.
Yeah,
like when they're in distress, or most frogs have it, but a lot of them have not been documented. Actually,
yeah, right. And a lot of them, and there's also the release call, which is the
release call is when they get grabbed by the wrong sex, or if they get grabbed by something that they want to put down. Yeah. So. And one thing that gives that away is that call is made with an open mouth, and almost no species have open mouth advertisement calls, which are the ones that so advertisement calls are usually the calls that we use to identify species by, because they are species specific. These other calls are much more harsher, and they're often made with an open mouth, which is unusual for frog calls. Yeah. So, just to go back to the skeleton and the skeletal muscular system for a second. So you have these enormously beefed up bodies, and that provides that really strong strength to them. They also have a very blunt face, and that bluntness of the face combined with the very strong cephalic muscles and the very strong trunk muscles makes them not only capable of digging in backwards, but probably, I would guess, also very capable of digging forward through substrate. So there's like totally they're totally specialized for this very powerful movement through difficult terrain that is quite different from other things.
When I see them, it's almost as if they just dig straight down.
Yeah.
Like it's not like a
they do the booty shake, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that booty shake that's also what Spea and other spadefoots like the European and
I would
American
say most frogs that are diggers are like that, unless they are like microhylids that have that snout thing.
Or Hemesis, which is also like forward. But yeah, most frogs will do a little booty swing, like a little shimmy to get into the ground. But I wonder, Ethan, maybe you can pay attention. Like, how do they? If they go down, do they always come out the same way, or do they like push through the soil to come up? Because I can't imagine with that strong. With the strength that they have.
I want to say, like, I have only seen them actually emerge from only a couple times, but it does seem like they come out face first.
Yeah, they probably would come out face first. I think that's even typical for the other things. But then the question is, do they emerge through the hole that they went in through, or do they emerge, move around, and then come up at a different spot? So, like, the easiest thing to do would be put a little toothpick or a little flag in where they've gone in and see, okay, I saw it go in here. If it comes up again later, is it going to come up and disturb that same marker?
I want to say it's a different. I want to say it's a different hole, but I can't. I can't swear to it. Yeah.
So, in any case, there's so much that we don't know about anything that lives underground. This is the same problem we have in Sicilians. We have in Breviceps. So, but I think they're incredible creatures, and this, with the pet trade and the fact that we don't know so much about the breeding ecology and the fact that it's so active, the real reason I wanted to talk about the captive thing is because someone uploaded a picture to Tumblr, and then someone else tagged me in the picture and was like, "Hey, what's this?" And I said, "Okay, well, that's Brevicipitidae dispersus. It's fairly obvious." And then I mentioned that these are not bred in captivity and that they are 100% from the wild. And then, I Googled to make sure that was true, and I found these, to my mind, very
dubious,
very dubious records of captive breeding. And the reason I say they're dubious records is because the photos that were posted were captive bred individuals, and they said they were juveniles, but they're way bigger than a true froglet of a Breviceps.
Yeah.
Like a Breviceps,
close to what I showed you, right?
Yeah, exactly. They were about the same size, maybe a tiny bit smaller, but these are clearly not froglets of Breviceps. And so, if you want to prove to me that you have bred these things in captivity, I want to see the whole process. I want to see if you can find the nest, great. Otherwise, at least show me that you've got
it's
one
so
1
easy
centimeter frogs, because 1 centimeter frogs will not ship in out of the country. Probably
they barely
very hard
ship
to get.
At that size. Yeah, I mean,
right. So I would be deeply surprised if that is a valid record. Of course, no fault to anybody who's trying their best, but then don't claim to do something that you obviously haven't done.
And I think a big warning for people that want to get these frogs: if you are not really like a frog specialist like Ethan is, or somebody that really cares about amphibians and stuff, these are animals that you're barely going to see.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, you aren't going to see. They're not going to be out and doing cute little TikTok things.
Yeah, and it's going to be really bad for them if you keep bothering them and taking them out of their
I think a lot of the people. So where I got familiar with this was before TikTok, where people would post these, they would go viral from clips on YouTube, and so there are video channels that are just devoted to this thing. And I think it's totally it's valid to be fascinated by these animals, but the way that those videos are often done, those creatures are clearly being taken out, bathed, and then put into a container to eat. I can sympathize with that approach, because if you have an animal like this and you want to be monitoring to make sure that it is healthy and you can't ever see it, then taking it out to make sure that it eats an appropriate amount, I can totally sympathize with. I would want to do that in some cases too.
Going back to that, I've mentioned the substrate debate. Most of the Asian keepers that I've seen that I have seen keep them on what is basically miniature Leica pellets.
Yeah,
those
I
little
saw
clay
that. Yeah.
Pellets, and that's very common. I've spoken to a couple people in Japan who keep newts.
Mm-hmm.
It started with that, I think.
Interesting.
And I mean, look, if it works, it works. But I think it's also not similar to what they live in.
It's gonna have. I think you'd have a very hard time breeding them. My policy on this, which maybe also shows off my European stance on the whole thing, is basically your best chance at having any breeding success with an animal like this is to get as close as possible to reproducing the natural environment that they come from.
And it may not be possible. Yeah, it just may not be possible.
I think we have to really emphasize the fact that you are not going to see them most of the time. They're going to be burrowed. Because I can imagine a lot of people are getting this because they have become so famous on Instagram, TikTok, and stuff, and everybody wants to get the cute round frog, but they're not going to be able to see
I'm in a bunch of Facebook groups for amphibians, rare amphibians as pets. It's probably a couple times a week someone pops in there who has no experience going, hey, where can I buy a rain frog?
Yeah.
That is dangerous. And I think
so dangerous.
Yeah.
And I would just also mention that Scaphiophryne are not easier. They are easier to breed and stuff, but they are rainforest frogs. They require specialized care. They require all of the things that are typical of having to keep a frog, which is constant and totally reliable food source. You're never going to see the things.
Josh's frogs. They are one of the more ethical breeders in the U.S. Right? They know what they're doing. And so if anyone was going to do that, it would be that. Right? They were the ones who kind of, I think, cracked breeding those. So in the U.S. So
right. And there are people who are breeding them in captivity in Germany as well, for instance, but it's mostly zoos. So
right.
Yeah. All of that to say, these are fascinating and very exciting and interesting animals. They have a very poorly known ecology and everything. They're very difficult to keep, and at least for now, until we crack the code.
Can I say
keep it to the pros?
I hate it when people are like, don't do as I say, and I'm not trying to be that. I'm just, in my case, it was like, I saw the shipment come in there, it kind of like the planets kind of aligned on that. And even then, one of them didn't make it.
And that's the reality of all of this. I mean, you can talk with any breeder who's worked with these kinds of animals, and especially very, very sensitive animals. You're going to lose a huge portion. Chameleons have the same thing. If you go listen to the Chameleon Academy podcast,
frogs,
you hear this
in general are so delicate. I mean, they're in reality, amphibians are a lot more delicate than reptiles could be a lot of times. And
definitely,
I've been to places where they have like shipments of stuff coming from like the Amazon and stuff, and it's horrible. And I don't. That's why you should try to never buy anything that is not a captive bred animal, because it's really bad.
And leave the establishment of the species to people who do that either professionally or with a level of professionality equivalent to professional.
Right.
So
I'm not, and I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't condone that at all. I'm just I'm in a unique position as far as that goes, and
well, you're an experienced breeder. You have tons of amphibians. You have bred these for years and years and years. You have a huge experience. You're not the person that saw a frog on TikTok and thought, I'm going to get one of those.
You don't have to be worried about this. This is this is not targeted at you.
I'm not taking it that way. I just want to be clear with people. Like I'm not trying to be hypocritical as far as that goes. But I'm also saying to you, you won't even enjoy them.
Exactly.
The same is true with your Sicilians, right? I mean, who
and to be fair,
basically, you get to look at a box of dirt.
And to be fair, that is true for most amphibians. I mean, you won't be able to see them going around in your... I think people have a wrong conception. People are very disconnected from nature nowadays, and they get their connection through social media, and they see all these animals that were staged to be
there's a connection to
in
owners.
a certain way.
They think that like the only way I can interact with this thing is to own it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not true, right?
No.
But unfortunately, it is the sort of culture that we live in. Another example of a frog that I'm working with that the Suriname toads, although they're not cute in the way that
they are cute. I like them.
I bought when the opportunity to get some wild caught ones, because nobody breeds them. I bought 10 of them. 4 made it past the 1 year mark.
Yeah. Wow.
Ooh. And
interesting.
This is a frog that does not ship well.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, once you get them established, are not too bad. I would say they're pretty close to like Xenopus.
Yeah.
The problem is that you have to have like 4 feet of depth to get them to breed.
Right.
So that's the struggle I've had is coming up with a way that doesn't involve me buying a swimming pool to get them to breed.
They can do
they have to do those.
They have to do the dance.
Yeah.
How interesting. Yeah. So, a lot of these things are very specialist, and I think we can go back to older episodes where we've talked about like the green list versus red list approach to how we handle the breeding thing. We don't have time to get into that today, but like the overall gist is most of these things, and I will paint a very broad brush here, not just Brevicipitidae, not just frogs in general, but most of these things, when they come in my opinion, when they come into the pet trade, if they come into the pet trade, the first people who should have first bids, and this should also be seen by the importers as such, people who have priority for acquiring those animals should be the ones who have the facility to establish them.
Yes.
That's maybe not in the interest of the importer, because the importer is like, well, then I lose the stock, but it is in the interest of the culture and of the community especially because many of these countries that these animals are coming from have limited windows of opening.
Yeah.
When the window shuts, you're not going to get any more specimens.
I hope that, I mentioned that it's basically decided by capitalism, and I hope that in the case that I saw, that the price tag on them self-selected for people who knew what they were doing. Unfortunately, I know that's probably not true.
Also, a concern for me is that they were ethically captured, that they were ethically shipped, that they had conditions where they...
that is hard.
I can almost guarantee that was not the case.
Because the reason why a lot of them don't make it is because they were not treated well during that shipment. So,
I can tell you that the importer that I spoke with said that they dewormed them and that was it, basically. And I don't know what that means. He didn't go into
what does that entail?
I have no idea what that actually means.
That is very worrisome to me.
That's I mean, I have thoughts about that I don't necessarily want to voice here on the podcast. But I think tracing those things back, especially all the way back to the collector, a valuable thing to try to do. Not always possible, not always feasible. And to go back to what I said earlier, this is a means of living for some people. It is not necessarily the right move to say we shouldn't be importing animals altogether, because it is a lifestyle and an economy for groups of people. So
not to go way off target, but to that point, I think we have to take not just the reptile trade, but the whole exotic animal trade as a thing. And one of the best examples I can think of that is neon tetras. In South America, neon tetras are farmed by locals, and it's a huge part of their economy now.
Right.
And the global supply of those fish, which are extremely common for the last 50 years in the aquarium trade, this is a staple of the aquarium trade, and it's actually a success story in terms of sustainably, setting something up. So my hope is that we see more of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think they're the exception, not the rule.
Just because I always have to have the last word. Just as a final closing thing, I would also say that we need to look broader. We need, as you say, exotic trade as a whole, and fishes are the perfect example. The reef fish that you get in your at the airport or at the aquarium or at the pet store, like almost none of those are bred in captivity. The vast majority of them are coming from the wild. Apparently, clownfish have had some farming success.
Again, thanks to media, right? So it's the Finding Nemo effect.
Of course. I mean, the reef pressure would be unsustainable were it not for Finding Nemo. So maybe we'll find a breakthrough and people will have a total solution for how to do this with Brevicipitidae. But I wouldn't hold my breath. Frogs are difficult. Not that saltwater fish and especially clownfish are not difficult, but it's a different thing.
Yeah.
And on that note, thank you so much for this really interesting debate. I actually would love to talk about this for another 3 hours, but unfortunately, time is ticking. So
we'll pick another TikTok animal next time. And,
I think that's the way forward, right? Just what's the trend? We have exciting things to talk about next time. We will probably be missing a month, but you don't care. The last episode released 3 months late, and it hasn't released yet, so I haven't heard any complaints yet, which is great. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in. Hey, Hiral, where can one find you on the internet?
I'm at Hiral Nike on X, but you can find me on Instagram at HiralTide.
Right. Ethan, how about you?
I'm at Black Mud Puppy almost everywhere.
And Gabriel?
Same. I'm at Serpent Hillis everywhere except Facebook, where I usually never go, and it's Gabriel Lugetto Art. And my website is gabriellugetto.com.
Super. You can find me at Mark Scherz at MarkScherz all over the internet. except on Facebook where it's at MD Shirts. But honestly, again, who uses Facebook nowadays? You can follow the podcast at SquaMates Pod on all of the social media things. You can find us on Instagram, on Twitter, on Blue Sky. We are all over the place. Sometimes we post things. You can, of course, follow us on YouTube. You can see our beautiful faces as we have these fascinating and exciting debates at youtube.com/@SquaMatesPod. And you can send us emails, squamatespod@gmail.com. You can go on our website, squamatespod.com. You can leave comments, you can have opinions, you can join us in the chat, in the YouTube comments. We are thrilled to have your feedback. We are thrilled to have episode suggestions. Please keep your snake suggestions to a limited minimum. We have too many of those. Everything is welcome. And we hope to be able to see some of you at the World Congress, or to have seen some of you at the World Congress, depending on when this episode goes out. Anyway, we thank you so much for listening. And as we say on the show, Hakuna
Hakuna
Matata.
Matata.